So psychologists are not paid very well. And even before I finished school, while I was writing this dissertation, I started trying to calculate out how I was going to pay for my own debt. And I'm like, this doesn't add up. I could see patients all day long, every single day, and I'm not going to be able to do this. So I started already thinking about like, what else can I do in the industry to try to cover myself?
Today, we're diving into a topic that's at the very heart of entrepreneurship, breaking barriers. Whether it's overcoming personal challenges, disrupting traditional industries, or venturing into uncharted territories without a roadmap, breaking barriers is often what defines the journey of a successful entrepreneur. It's about seeing a problem that others overlook, taking risks despite uncertainty, and persevering when the odds are stacked against you. Our conversation today embodies the spirit perfectly. I'm truly honored to introduce Dr. Jessica Dolgan, a trailblazer who broke through multiple barriers, making a significant impact in both mental health and the tech industries. Without any prior experience in business or technology, Jessica took the bold step to create Therapy Partner, one of the first SaaS platforms designed specifically to streamline operations for psychologists and psychiatrists. Her journey is a compelling story of innovation, resilience, and the courage to venture into the unknown. Jessica didn't just build a successful company. She challenged the status quo in an industry resistant to change, all while staying true to her mission of improving mental health care. So let's get started with Jessica Dolgan and explore what it truly means to break barriers in pursuit of a meaningful change. Jessica, it's great to see you.
Eric, thanks for having me. This is fun. I was looking
Super
forward to
fun.
it.
Well, I know you a little bit, but some of the things I don't even know, and I'm excited to kind of delve back into some of your background and understand really how it all started. Why you even started in the mental health profession. What was the impetus to kind of take you in that direction?
The truth of the matter was I finished graduate school. I was a doctor by the time I was 26. So I don't think there was an enormous amount of intention around it initially. I think in college, I had some very good academic advisors, and I think they did a good job identifying some of my skill sets and perhaps more importantly, some of my lack of skill sets. They really encouraged me to move towards kind of the social sciences and away from the hard sciences. And then, I think that it got solidified. I got a degree in psychology, and I was so young before graduate school. I mean, I wasn't even 21 finishing college. So I took a job at Children's Hospital. And I worked in inpatient psych. So for those of us who've actually worked on a locked unit inside of a hospital, it moves the needle. Later, when I came to hire docs for my practice, I found myself gravitating towards the docs that had worked in those environments. If you've seen the worst of the worst and the most painful situations, it changes you. And I was completely inspired by the docs that were working on the inpatient unit. I immediately saw that this was a kind of a sacred act to be a psychologist and to help these people. And I also really felt like I probably should get a profession at that point. And I was a mental health worker, but I saw these docs like affecting change on the unit. And I'm like, it's time to go to graduate school. And so I did and got a master's and a doctorate degree and then popped out as kind of a baby doctor at 26. And so that's kind of how that started.
Well, so take me from the part of I'm now a doctor and I want to help people to begin building a practice, because one is as a sole practitioner, you're a business owner, but as you started building a practice with, I think you had 10, 12, doctors working within your practice itself, what was that step? What was the process in your mind of saying, I can do more, I want to build more, I want to inspire more?
When you look back on how things work, there's a lot of angels that kind of drop in and you look at this entire kind of growth path. And I think what happened was there was a lot of placements in graduate school. I had a placement in a group practice. It was a gigantic practice. And it was a group practice, but they ran group therapy. And very quickly in graduate school, I started, ramping up and doing a lot for this small business owner. And he positioned me in an office right next to the administrator. And so when I had a break between patients, I would go over and visit. Her name was Connie. I'd go to Connie's office and spend some time with her and hang out a little bit. And most of the time when I was in Connie's office, she was folding invoices and statements to send off to patients. to be paid. And also at the end of these groups, we would run these, neurobehavioral groups for children. And I'd be checking in with parents and trying to collect cash and checks. And the whole thing just seemed very awkward to me. And I was a new doctor, so I was uncomfortable talking to patients about money right after some mom is crying about their child. And then I'm like, do you ever check? Like, it just became very uncomfortable. And so I know you asked about the group practice, but the truth of the matter is I actually worked in that group practice until I grew enough of a practice. And as I came to graduate, I left his group practice and started my own. So the tech and the group practice kind of converged almost at the same time.
Interesting.
In
Interesting.
fact, I actually wrote my dissertation on effectively business inefficiencies in private practice. So in graduate school, you go to your committee, and I'm in a clinical program. So I'm supposed to be talking about clinical research or something that would be what they feel is relevant to my field. And I went and said, I want to talk about credit and billing and inefficiencies among psychologists and psychiatrists. Again, blessing in disguise that you don't know about. The advisors were so bored by the topic. They never said this to me, but I felt like they weren't that inspired by my dissertation topic, that they got right. The few that I asked all said sure. And for those of us who've written a dissertation, you go through round after round after round of editing and committee meetings and all this stuff, and then you have to defend your dissertation. I went through one round, and I don't think it's because I wrote a good dissertation. I think it's because it was so boring to them. And it was, psychologists don't write business dissertations.
But
So
Jessica, it's so fascinating that you say that, because for me, like worked with therapists, both kids and myself, and you think about that transactional aspect of something that is not transactional. I mean, you are helping somebody become, grow in their journey. You're helping somebody overcome a massive, obstacles or issues. And then to your point, oh, thank you. On the way out the door, can you write me a check for, $95, right? It just is, you would think, and not to mention, I grew up, my father was a physician. They're not good with money to begin with, right? And it's a terrible thing to say, but in general, I say that not because they don't have the intelligence, the intellect, or the ability. It's their desire is not, that is not why they went into the practice. That is not why they went in the field. They went in the field to help. They went in the field to nurture. They went in the field to, provide more value. And often, just like you were seeing from your group practice, it's an uncomfortable moment for both parties, because that was not the reason we went into that kind of interaction to begin with. So I'm just fascinated that there was such a lack of understanding how important this was that you kind of hit upon.
the thing is, I use the word sacred, and I don't mean to use it in some loosey-goosey kind of spiritual fashion. I really mean it. Like when you're sitting with somebody and they're talking about the most painful things in their life, and maybe we'll talk about this more, but it takes a long time for mental health patients to come forward. When we don't feel good, it takes approximately 24 hours for people to call their PCP, maybe 6 to 8 hours to go to an urgent care. People can be psychologically distressed for years before they'll walk in the door. And the research shows we don't have much of an opportunity to capture them either. So to go from somebody who is struggling, they've had a trauma, they're having, a major depressive episode, something awful's happened to them, or they're just having a human struggle, to asking for payment. And when I started, the truth of the matter is these docs they weren't taking credit cards, and they were not using any software at all. The closest software that they had was this software that Connie used called Shrink Wrapped. And I asked, that's what it was called, Shrink Wrapped. And I said, Connie, how does Shrink Wrapped work? And she said, well, it's really great. I come up with their balance, and then I feed this invoice into the printer, and then it tells me what their balance is, and then I mail it out to them. And I said, I mean, there's just so many of these on your desk. Is it that people don't pay? And she's like, oh yeah, we get 1 out of 5 people will pay each month when we send them out. So I sometimes have to send 3 to 5 invoices, and a lot of them go to collections. I'm like, this is a mess.
Wow.
This is really overwhelming. And I found myself very distracted. When you first start practicing, theory and practice haven't really converged. And so I'm doing all of these things. I had this billing log on my desk, and I'm like, don't forget to ask all these moms for checks. And it just made it really difficult to focus on patient care. And outside of that, I thought this is not a good experience for the patient. Like, how can they come in and out of here, especially psychologists and psychiatrists? You go to a, urgent care, you go see your PCP, you check in with a different person. In
Right.
mental health, you're paying the exact person who just
Totally.
talked to you. They don't have front desk staff.
Totally.
So
So, I mean, now you're at the point, you see this massive gap. You're not a technologist to begin with, right? You don't know that, but you see there's a clearly an inefficiency in a market that you want to, not only take advantage of potential as a business opportunity, but really just make your practice and potentially practices of your peers more effective. So walk me through your steps, Jess. What'd you do to go from this doesn't make sense, this is kind of messed up, to I'm going to create something better, and how the heck do I make that happen?
I absolutely knew nothing. So I had never taken a business class in my life. By the way, recently, I think I took my first series of a business class. This much later, I signed up for a traditional business class. So no business class and really no awareness of technology. And just to bring us back a little bit, I was trying to think about the era. Like very few people were starting to purchase airline tickets online, starting to buy some books from Amazon, but they're certainly not transacting all the time online. So the dissertation had this, have to present a novel concept. So I actually presented the idea for Therapy Partner, not with a name, but I said, well, maybe we could have this software. And I was very focused on the billing. I didn't think about any like surround sound or other uh, items that people might need to operate their practice. I was just focused on the billing. Eric, I knew so little. I cannot tell you how much I embarrassed myself. First of all, I knew an IT guy, and his name was John Santini. And I pulled Santini aside and I said, hey, I need a website where people can just go and hit a button, see all their patients, and hit a credit card and bill them. And he's like, that's not a website, that's software. I'm like, right. Do you know somebody who does that? He introduced me to a software coder, and I'm not even done with graduate school. I'm on residency at Boulder. And in Interlochen, there was like a young coder, Vinny. And Vinny took me in the evenings, and I just started putting on like a whiteboard, like, what if they could hit this button? So I had to learn what a software coder was. And then because I was focused on billing, I had so little awareness of how all these pieces would come together. I remember at the time a girlfriend gave me a magnet for my fridge, like as a gift, and it said, start a business, what's to know? And I laugh about that all the time because this is exactly what was happening. So then I wanted it to take credit cards. I actually lined up, Eric, in the personal teller line at the bank, got to the front of the line and was like, I'm trying to let more than one doctor, more than myself, take credit cards. And I was wondering if there's an account I can open for that. She's like, you need to go upstairs to the business division. I'm like, right. I'm like, where's that? She's like, on the fifth floor. Like, you have to take it. You have to open a business. You have to talk to business people. I don't even know what you're talking about. This is how bad it was. I knew absolutely nothing.
But Jess, isn't that the best though? Because everyone who looks at your success and things that you've done and the things that you've accomplished are like, oh, look, Jess knew what the heck she was doing. She was crushing it from day one, and she built this software, she grew the software, she sold the software, made, you know, tons of money making that happen. And it's so amazing to hear what it took to actually get to, we haven't even got to the point of you're trying to sell software yet. But I love the fact that the background and all the lack of information, the lack of knowledge, because remember, this was what year, 2005, 2006?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yes.
this, software, especially vertical software, wasn't ubiquitous in the ecosystem. And you're sitting out here, loving the story, going to a teller, trying to make that happen, and ultimately building something that is going to make a lot of value to a lot of people. So you figured out the coding, you got somebody to build a basic product, you had something good enough where you probably can use for your own practice. Take me through that step of, okay, this works enough where I'm using it of value. And I think other practitioners may want to have something like this, and nothing's out there. Otherwise, I would have already used it. I mean, in terms of you, walk me through that. How did that transition happen to begin selling that software?
The first thing was one of the most beneficial things for me in starting this software initially was the private practice provide. So I started a group practice and I kind of started the software company all at the same time. And and we'll talk about this more, but I'm pretty certain I didn't sleep for most of my 20s and 30s. I started out early. I mean, I worked full time in graduate school. The shift I was on was the 7 to 7. And then I went to school during the day, which sometimes now I go back and I'm like, well, that just involves now sleeping. Like, how did that actually work when you're working 12 hours and nights? And anyway, I put myself through all this. So I wanted to just highlight that I think an enormous amount of the drive involved debt. So psychologists are not paid very well. And even before I finished school, while I was writing this dissertation, I started trying to calculate out how I was going to pay for my own debt in my life. And the debt load, and I knew I had 6 months, like that was the ticker. You get 6 months till the student loans kick in. And for me, it was probably close to like 280. And I'm like, this doesn't add up. I could see patients all day long, every single day, and I'm not going to be able to do this. So I started already thinking about like, well, what else can I do in the industry to try to cover myself? And that kind of was a theme all along because I recognized a lot of the docs felt the exact same way as me. But anyway, in the practice, it was really nice to start building the software right where I was watching doctors interact with patients. So the first thing it did was just store credit cards, right? We just made it so that people could actually take a form of payment and put it in once, and then we could charge the credit card, give them a little transaction form that says, "A new patient, I agree to let you charge my credit card when I come in." This quickly evolved to kind of more bulk billing upfront. Everything in healthcare is a one-to-one ratio, is what I call it. You check in with a person, it's an individual process, you schedule an appointment, you bill with sometimes a separate person, you get a separate invoice, the doctor sees you individually, they make a patient note individually, all of this in these individual activities. But I realized that billing doesn't have to be that specific to patients on the back end. You can take all of the billing for a day or a week and start batching it. So I started playing with it in my own practice and using it. This thing was the clunkiest piece of software you've ever seen in your life. I'm not even certain the final version of my software wasn't that clunky, but no, it was much prettier by the time we were done with it. But up front, it was just like clunky, almost robotic. But I went back to the private practice owners, including the group practice owner that I originally worked for. And I said, "Will you try this?" I kept pushing them. There was a psychiatrist really early on who had a good practice with volume, and this group practitioner that I'd come from. And they were really hesitant, but throughout my life, there's been a couple of people who don't know what I'm talking about or why I'm doing what I'm doing, but my mentor said this at one point, "I don't know, Jess, I just bet the jockey." And I feel like these two doctors felt the same way about me. They're like, I guess I'll try it if you want me to. If it's not going to disrupt patients and things like that, we'll try it." And I said, "If it works, you can have lifetime service for free. I'll only charge you for the transactions." And as you know, I kept my I kept
Yeah,
my word.
you
They
did,
got
totally.
lifetime service, but there was a couple adopters who were willing to try it. And and that's exactly what happened. So I was going out and trying to get some people to, use the
Just
software.
just give it a shot, basically, put you on the map with it. But you hit on something,
Right.
Josh, that is bigger than just your software. You hit on, I kind of say, the fear of failure, right? I said, "Why'd you do this?" And your failure was you couldn't pay you couldn't pay your debts. That was you failing wasn't your failing as a practitioner or failing, as a business owner. You were going to fail because you couldn't survive, essentially. So on that theme of fear of failure, I mean, so many people that and I know and just in the world around us would be like, yeah, I would love to start a business. I would love to be on my own. But that fear of failure holds so many people back from taking that first step because it's scary. I have my own journey of how I got over that, essentially. So outside of just, your drive to not failing, as you started getting, now you have a technology company, or at least the early stages of one. Walk me through some of those moments of, failure opportunities, or, the precipice of it not getting to the next step, and how you overcame those.
I think maybe I expect to fail. That and I don't really know where that comes from, but it's almost like spaghetti method. I'm just like, I'm gonna throw so many things at the wall. Something is gonna stick. This has kind of been my approach, from a very young age, and I just actually expect to fail. I think maybe the overarching theme is that I have always wanted the full experience of a life, and this gets added to, over time, 20 years being a doctor, but I think that I want a fullness of experience, and I expect to suffer. I actually feel much more, excited when I see moments when I don't. I don't expect things to be easy. I'm pretty gritty in this way, scrappy. We can talk about maybe some of this street smarts versus book smarts comes from, but I yeah, I actually thought that the only real failure, even early on with this, was not doing something. I'm like, you're gonna have a bankruptcy. You are gonna end up bankrupt, and very quickly, in very short order, if you can't kind of figure out some complementary things to do. I mean, to be able to meet the student debt payment, and then I'm like, I just got through student debt payment and rent, and you don't have a dollar left. Like, there's nothing left, and that's if you're doing this much. So I think that the early challenges, involved, business professionals not understanding the need. So that was part of it. talking to accountants, talking to investors, I got a mayor's office of economic development loan. I love telling this story just because there was a guy who also got a loan next to me. I was very angry that he got more money than me. Anyway, he's been enormously successful. He owns the Snooze restaurant chain, I believe. He was also in this small class. The mayor's office gives like 6 people some entrepreneurial loans.
Was
But
that John?
I don't know if I
Oh,
would.
that's
You might
fun.
know his name, but anyway, I think he was the guy who started Snooze. It's a delicious breakfast place. Anyway, I'm like trying to go to them for like mental health funding. I think I got like $130,000 or something like that. Anyway, it was hard to explain why I was doing what I was doing. I recognized not only how much people didn't know about healthcare and the way it works, people knew almost nothing about mental health care. And so explaining that to people, and my business interest in it, I think was very, very difficult early on. I had a supervisor at one point say, also psychologist, you mentioned this like maybe with your father, like I think that sometimes people in healthcare actually have an aversion to business, and they can sometimes see it as actually kind of dirty. And I remember having kind of a more classic kind of Freudian supervisor who at one point in front of a group of people said, "You're not going to stop until mental healths are like in shopping, uh, you know, centers. Like you're not going to stop till this thing turns into lens crafters." And I was like, I think that's a great idea. Maybe more
Right.
people would pull in.
Right.
But anyway, I think people did not know what to make of me. This was kind of a full theme. And then on top of it, the doctors were very resistant to change. I like to say healthcare professionals are 10 years behind business professionals. And at the time, I felt like mental health professionals were 10 years behind those healthcare professionals. So getting them to adopt this was really difficult. And they were extremely worried about security. This was a huge issue. They were really worried about patient confidentiality, security, privacy practices.
HIPAA, all that kind of stuff.
HIPAA, all that, and storing of credit cards. I mean, these are people who there were doctors who started using this system and they had bought like 2 things online themselves. And I'm trying to get them to store all their patients' payment information in a computer system. And some of them don't even use computers that well. And very early, I thought to myself, you're absolutely crazy. Nobody's ever going to buy this. Like, why don't you just pick a different product someone might buy? Like, why would you pick a product no one wants to buy? Whether it's a good idea or not, people aren't buying it, you know?
So Jess, you're at this point now where you have people, you have this successful practice of, the therapy practice, psychology practice with multiple people working at it. You have a technology company where it is at least out there selling. At this point, you're selling software. So from an outside perspective, everyone's probably like, Jess is crushing. Jess is just, not only is she crushing as a psychologist and her therapy practice is growing, she's got this great, software. Boy, Jess just been crushing. Internally, it must have been very different. The stresses of managing patients, managing practitioners, managing coders, managing software, all going on at the same time. So walk me through some of your setbacks. What were some of the things that, with all of that moving pieces, as much as you looked like a shining star from the outside, inside, you were struggling, I'm sure, trying to keep it all together. So walk me through some of your setbacks and how you overcame them.
I mean, I don't even really know where to start. I would say that I pretty much had a struggle with every single part of this. I had to teach myself things every single day. On top of, I was a relatively new doctor, so I'm trying to juggle this practice and build the technology. And but I had to learn an enormous amount. I mean, I had not met with accountants before. I had not met with lawyers before. I met with a patent person. I mean, every single day was like some sort of educational process. And it was incredible. It was incredibly humbling. I mean, I think
Was it a curiosity you had, Jess, that just kept taking you to the next step? What triggered that next step and that next step and the next step?
I have a relentless curiosity about me. So if I don't know the answer, I also have a vulnerability to me that I do think sometimes people are okay with. I'm willing to walk into a room and say, I have absolutely no clue what's happening. Would you mind helping me? Like, I don't know. I mean, my business partner says, I'll stop a meeting and just say, I probably said it to you, Eric. I don't understand anything you're saying. Would you mind kind of just explaining what you're actually saying? I'll stop in the middle. The pride factor's like pretty low. And and I thought it was maybe the only way to survive was to continue to ask questions. I was thinking about a business advisor I went to early. Someone would give you a name, gives you a name, it gives you a name. I'm not in the business
Wow.
community. I didn't go to business school. Went to a business advisor's office, and this guy was like kind of high end, right? I mean, he's like maybe somebody I would see like 20 years later. And the first thing he said to me is, "You can't afford me, but I'm going to give you 5 minutes of my time." He brought me into like a room and drew two circles on a board, a Venn diagram. And I was trying to figure out how to get funding. And he pointed in the circle and drew two circles. One said people you know and people who have money. And then he just made this little Venn diagram and he said, "This is where you focus your energy. Go home and make a list of anyone you know who has money." And I'm like, that was my 5-minute week. That's what I could get. But the point is there was a certain amount of just continuing to try things. And I think one of the big setbacks I kind of wrote down was, we blew through all the early funding. I took some advice too from advisors. I tended to not trust certain things. I took the advice and I followed it very directly. And that was not always the best thing. I needed to go back to using my instinct about my own
Yeah.
industry. So we blew through all the early funding. So it was gone. At one point, I had $6,800 in the bank account. I took a flight, met with the guy who was kind of assigned to me from some of my early investors to manage me. He was a chief financial officer of an oil and gas company, but this company, the husband and wife, who I'll talk about maybe in a little bit, decided to invest some money in the company. And anyway, all of it was gone. And he said, "Listen, you tried really hard." I threw up before the meeting, for the record. And and then and it was like kind of like at a fancy hotel. And then he said, "Listen, you tried your best. You're kind of a tenacious kid, and you should just bankrupt this place." And I didn't. I said, "Well, I said I still have $6,800. He's like, "That's nothing." I'm like, "Well, something." So anyway, I got rid of all the staff except for me and one person. It was the only time in my career I sent someone home without pay. And I said, "I have to pay you in 2 weeks." And I did send him home without pay, and we just started over. And what we did was we started providing education to the doctors. We started I signed myself up to give continuing education classes on the business of practice. And all of a sudden we realized they didn't want to buy the software, Eric. They wanted to go to the class about how to run a business though. And so
Interesting.
they attended the class on how to operate your businesses, which, later became my Love Your Practice podcast and things like
Yeah.
this. That was never a problem to sell. The doctors loved going to those classes. And I signed myself up so they could get continuing education credit. So they got to, renew their license. So they get continuing education credit. They go to a business class because they are stressed about business. And when they're at the business class, we give them a free trial of the software. I'm like, turns out this is how you sell this. This went much better. But we had to try every other iteration and almost be broke. And, everything was difficult for me. I don't think
So,
anything was easy.
well, we'll get to the fun part in a second, but how do you think that mental health background in practicing in the mental health world helped you in the business community, helped you in those investor meetings, helped you attract employees, helped you attract customers? How do you see those two things that came together?
I do want to talk about this. I mean, I think that the phrase soft skills has kind of entered the business community now, but I feel like they're too lightly emphasized, in an in-depth way. Um, I I think that one of the things that did work really well was this was not just about making money for me. I really wanted to change things in mental health. I wanted the patient experience to be better. I wanted doctors, they were so stressed. Every time I met with them, they weren't talking about patient care. They were talking about their practices and money struggles and meeting their student debt requirements. And I just really wanted to change the environment. And I think I was able to convey that to the team. They got it, and people talk of, they use these catchphrases pretty loosely, like mission driven. But this team really was mission driven. I'm like, we're actually trying to move the needle here in mental health. Here's what happens when doctors are more stable in their businesses. They can provide more discount services. There's more access to care. They can educate the public. Like, these are really serious social issues. And I think I was able to get them, wrapped into this story, and people and the tenure of the employees proved that to me. They really got behind it. They felt like they had a purpose. And this wasn't just about working at a company or sitting at a desk and trying to help the company make money. They felt like we had a purpose. And I also started recognizing that this was a really bumpy path. You probably even observed this in me. But Eric, for the longest time, all I tried to do was fit in. That I know you've seen me make these attempts. I would walk into these business meetings and try to be like the people I was meeting with. I tried to use the language they used. I tried to study beforehand to see if I could kind of guess what they knew before I showed up so I wouldn't embarrass myself. Anyway, this process was incredibly futile. Incredibly futile. And the more I tried to fit in with business people or, people had more traditional pedigree or something, the worse I did. And the more I moved into this place where I recognized that actually all of my skill sets, not just as a psychologist, and I don't know, are these innate skills? And then I got a career that matched it. I don't know.
Right.
But the ability to listen for emotion and motivation, to recognize drivers in behavior. I think I'm kind of a distiller of information when you're sitting in a clinical office and someone shares the entire scope of their life with you. Psychologists are distillers of information. We're also, I think, sometimes blamed or kind of thought of as people who are in this very soft realm, but we're scientists.
Right.
We use outcome-based, research-driven data to make decisions. And so the combination of those kind of two skill sets maybe coming together, all of these skills that we're working, that I use to see patients and to like get to know people in a really meaningful way, actually translated really beautifully to business. It was actually very helpful to be able to determine, you've seen me in some business dealings,
Yeah.
like kind of like look into what the motivations of people are and how do we strategically set ourselves up to have this go well, listening skills. I think actually psychology is at the center of everything we do in business. I just don't
Yeah.
know if it's talked about enough.
It's such a good point because no matter what we do, I mean, we're interacting on a daily basis with everyone. We're interacting with our customers, our employees, our teammates, investors. And if we're not engaging from a, um, thoughtful listening, connectivity way, we're missing the point. So I'm going to take you. So we've heard the struggle because it's real. The struggle is real as we talk about it, and there is no way, in my view, there's no skipping the steps. To go from A to B is just hard. Hard is a relative thing. I could only imagine the life and the growth journey you had from a personal standpoint, which you learned along the way. But take me through. You now have thousands of customers. Your software is generating profit. You're growing your multi-million dollar software company. And you're starting to get some people come to you saying, you've built something really special, Jessica. Even though you still feel like you're scrapping on a daily basis, people are coming to you saying, we would love to buy what you've created because we think we could take it to even another level. Walk me through your mindset of where you were then and what you decided to do at that point.
Because I was teaching myself in the background, right? I was able to track to the fact that this might happen. So this was one of the things that wasn't a surprise, right? I actually was able to learn like, well, this is the trajectory of tech companies. You don't hold them forever. You grow them and you sell them. And these are the types of people who
I,
buy
I
them.
haven't I haven't learned that one yet, though, Jess.
Yeah.
That's my problem.
Yeah. Crazy. Yeah, well, this is when you're kind of a flagship, it happens just a little differently. Like, but I did come to understand that maybe people might start poking around. Ultimately, I think it helped later when I did some, helped with some acquisition work. It was very helpful for me to be on the side of a founder and getting these phone calls from private equity groups, and kind of getting a sense of why they were interested and what they were interested in and how genuine or not genuine they were. As a psychologist and a business person, I was like, how many phone calls do these guys have to make to be successful? Because this is a really not inspiring conversation. Like, you are not able to build rapport. You're not able to build rapport. You're not that interested in my story. You're not listening. You're kind of social and emotional intelligence is not coming through in this call. So I think what happened to me is, well, first of all, you were persistent. So we should just say that. I mean, I think you were persistent. You were persistent, and
Well, we're stepping back for the listeners to know where we're going to get to.
yeah,
The company that I run ultimately ended up buying Jessica's technology company. So that's where the persistence that she's talking about.
you were persistent, yes, for people who don't know our kind of combined story. But the thing is also there was a huge, two other companies entered the space that you know of. And it was shocking for me. And I knew they were coming, right? You know, these companies are going to come, but it was fascinating for me to see how fast they grew given different circumstances. So they both came from tech backgrounds, and one came out of Silicon Valley. They had more funding. They had I was kind of the first in certain ways, and now when I give advisory, I'm like, "Man, it's not always best to be first." Sometimes you want to go down sometimes you want to go down a slick slide. Later, I had an incredible conversations with one of my competitors, and it was one of the most meaningful conversations in my career. He actually called, and I just said, "You've built an incredible product." I always approach my competitors actually from a collaborative standpoint. I'm like, "There's enough customers. I don't need to be competitive really with
Yeah.
you." Anyway, once, I had sold, we had the conversation, and he said, "You made it really easy. You're the one who kind of innovated in this space, and we were able to copy some of the things you did, and we just did some of them better and with, like, a lot more money and a lot more tech people and all." And it felt nice to at least receive the credit
That's
from
amazing.
him that he
That's
was
amazing.
able he's like, "And I'm not a psychologist." So I think that, anyway, I think the competitive force made me really start thinking about whether it was time to exit. And ultimately, when I made the decision to exit the company, I really wanted to move to a trusted source. And in that case, that was somebody that I'd been in business a long time. I received other phone calls, as you know, from people other than you. I knew you and ultimately did go back to my way of being. I felt like I had rapport with you. I felt like I trusted you. Um, I felt like I could relate to you. I felt that you were gonna take good care of my employees. All of that mattered to me, maybe
Yeah.
more than just the ticket price, on selling. And I also thought that, you and I might do some creative things going forward. There's kind of a painful, an excitement and a pain in terms of, like, letting go of this kind of baby you
Well,
grew.
let's walk on that. Let's dig into that a little bit. So, um, you sold your company. It was probably one of the best professional days of your career, from an economic standpoint, at least. A lot of business owners who get to the point of selling their company have a lot of mixed emotions. It's difficult. You built something, nobody knows the blood, sweat, and tears and all the sacrifices that somebody had to make to build something that somebody ultimately wants to buy because it's hard to get to that point. So you got to that point and you
Yeah.
did it. Walk me through your emotions. Walk me through how you felt after it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think everyone would want to hear, what that was like, even though it feels like it's just a success from the outside. What does it feel internally?
I think I felt all the things, which I love to feel. Want the full kind of breadth of all the feelings that I can have. One of the things that I noticed, like right after it happened, was this clap of silence. It kind of felt like, and I remember coming out of like the closing room and seeing you later. It was maybe just like half hour later, and you were talking to somebody, but like I don't know if you like gave me a hug or gave me a high five or something like that, and I kind of walked past you, and all of a sudden, all this background noise that had been going on for like over a decade in my mind, it was like a clapping in the universe. It was like very quiet. I'm like, had this feeling of I kind of got it over the finish line, even if it was just barely. Like I did it. I have sold my company. The responsibility. I don't think I recognized how the pressure of how much responsibility I put on myself. And I think partially it's because I'm a bit of a humanist too. It wasn't just about running a company. I'm like, I have to keep these people employed. I have to give them opportunities. I have to help women get ahead in business. I have to like ensure these doctors have the safest software they can possibly use. Like the pressure that I'd been carrying for a long time. So that kind of clap of release of pressure, I think was maybe some of the first things that I felt like I was like, "Okay, done." It's almost like graduating or something else in your life, like, there was a relief, um, and a happiness, and I also, had a that if if classically, if you're me, it probably took, I don't know, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 3 hours, I don't know, from the clap of silence to, "Huh, what do I do with all this energy that's me? Like,
So,
where's
so
this
that's
gonna
it's a
go?"
great transition to my next question.
And
So, what are you up to? You talked about you wanted to help women in business, you wanted to help women in tech, you wanted to help, expand therapy in terms of getting it to more people who need actual help in the mental health field. So, what have you done? But more importantly, where's your focus now? With so much energy, creativity, knowledge, even if you learned it the hard way, you learned it. How are you utilizing all that richness, within your life today?
well, I still spend a decent amount of time in mental health advocacy. I publicly speak, I still see patients. I think I'm not done with my drive around there's so much to do in mental health. I think the stigma is better, but it still takes people an enormous amount of time to come forward for assistance. I don't think the public is, even this mind body health, you hear it a lot. I can't stand it. I said in front of an audience maybe a couple of months ago, I'll retire when people stop saying mind body health. I can't stand it. I'm like, why can't we just call this health? It's just that your brain is the only organ that expresses judgment around you.
Isn't that crazy? It's so crazy. And you've been watching this for so long.
If you and I had lower back pain this morning, it would take 5 hours for someone to be like, "Is it a kidney infection? I think I'll go to urgent care." But if your brain is involved, the delay is enormous, and then the stigma is enormous. We still have a huge issue with suicide in this country, biologically based illness, just the education, and helping people understand that we actually can engage in preventative medicine now in mental health. That if you get in early enough, we can change the neural trajectory of your
That's
well-being and
fascinating.
and your overall prognosis. So I still feel really passionate about this piece. I think that's always going to be in my life. Um, trust me, I threatened to retire, but I think I'm too young to retire. I don't think I should stop
You're
speaking about.
way too young to retire,
I'm way
Jess.
too young to retire, and who knows what retirement even what that even means. So I still feel really passionate about that. I'm still engaged in that space. I don't think I ever will not be. I think I've told you there's 2 other things that I've kind of taken on recently. I am doing some C-suite advisory work, um, and I think that the drive there, once again, is psychological in nature. I think that, I did not always find that I had the right advisors. Um, and or knew how to locate them, and I felt so overwhelmed and incredibly isolated, and there was all of these feelings, and so it's been really nice to go back, talk about difference in how you, interact in a meeting, like, walking in now to do some advisory with companies, tech companies, healthcare tech companies, um, it's really interesting for me to help them, but with none of the pressure of operating my own company.
Right. Totally.
Right? But seeing some of the psychological struggles and also looking at the entire, everything, the roadmap for the company, the way they're operating with employees. Sometimes I do individual coaching with, just C-suite individuals who are operating the company. Everything from looking at the financials to adjusting tech and kind of, company roadmaps to actually spending time meaningfully with them and helping them understand where they are in the cycle. There's a company in town that I've been doing some C-suite advisory for very recently, and I'm very excited about it. It's an innovative software for the restaurant space.
Right. Sure.
Um, Probably you've been to a bird call up in Boulder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Restaurant, and they actually designed my business partner, David Burton from Therapy
Yeah.
Partner, my software tech company, helped build this technology. And actually, you may not know this, but while we were selling our company, they came to us, and we were on the way out the door, not building any more tech right in that moment, kind of pause. They asked us to design the first scope for this restaurant. So Therapy Partner actually wrote the first scope of service for that chicken restaurant. And they have now grown this, and they're using it in all their locations, but they're going to start white labeling it. And I think, you and I look at a lot of software. And the truth of the matter is not all of it is terribly inspiring to me. This software, I think, has the ability to really shift that kind of marketplace for fast casual restaurants. I think the software's called Poncho. I think it could be enormously successful. And this one's actually been inspiring for me to work on.
By the way, the whole thing, Jess, I mean, the inspiring aspect, which I love so much about, we started about you're a therapist in a mental health institution, to starting a technology company, which you're a scrap and incline, to now giving advice to high tech, high growth software organizations is pretty incredible trajectory. I mean, you think about that learnings you've had. And so what I'd love to kind of do as we kind of close up all of our Business Underdog kind of podcasts, I want all the listeners to get something to take away, things that you've learned. I mean, plenty, hopefully, they'll learn along the way. But, starting with kind of, 3 top lessons, if you had to tile it down to 3 things that you have learned along the way that you would love to impart on, people listening to your story.
I think seeking advice and showing vulnerability goes a really long way. I think it's often underestimated how much people want to help other people. I mentioned to a friend, you know this. There's people who call me from all manner of things. Just talk about in a day's time. I told a girlfriend the other day, like, if you looked at my text messages, you would think something is seriously wrong with my life. There are people calling about mental health issues. There are people calling about business. As you know, I've started doing some property development. There's people like asking design questions. I mean, the breadth of what people think it's okay to just say, "Hey, could you jump on the line with me? I got a question for you." Whether it's someone in my family is sick, can you help us find the right help? Or something is wrong with my furnace, would you help me? I mean, it's very strange. But the point is I actually want to call back and help. And when I was on that side of it, when I was starting, I was I felt so vulnerable and isolated, and I really never wanted to bother people. I was like, I don't want to bother you. What you've come to find is people actually want to help. There's a lot of people who truly want to share their expertise. They want to mentor, they want to help, they want to talk about their own experience. And so, I think one of the lessons is to actually seek advice and actually take the time to show some vulnerability, like recognize whether you're spending more time faking it to make it, or whether you're spending time just authentically saying, I really don't know exactly what I'm doing, and I'd be very grateful for the help. And people appreciate a meaningful exchange too. I think actually building relationships. One of the things that worked best for me in finding a business partner was that guy has every skill I do not have.
Mhm.
Every single one. We are such a great complement. You know, when we take phone calls together, sometimes people will get introduced, and I say, "If it wasn't for Dave, I would have crashed this thing into an iceberg." And Dave says, "If it wasn't for Jess, we wouldn't have left the dock." Like, these are highly complementary skill sets. I know where I struggle, and I think if people can identify that and be open about it. And then the last thing I've said, which you kind of said as well, and by the way, if we turn the camera, you would say just as many of these things and potentially far more meaningfully. But I think that the outcome, I mean, I know that they say this, but the outcome is far less important than the process. Like the leap of faith and all of the learning is where the gold is. I did some, I had a patient at some point who's like a high level athletic coach. And he said something to me on the phone that struck me. He said, you know, all athletes tell the story of their career by inflection points. When they won this tournament, when they hit this position, when they got this ranking, when they got on this team, they kind of scatter plot their life with these inflection points. And he said, everything about being an athlete happens in between. And it really hit me. I felt like this is a person. Yes, there's these moment of inflection, like you launch the software, or I almost go bankrupt and throw up in a hotel, or you acquire the company. These are inflection points, but all of the meat, like all of the best part of it, actually happens in the middle. And so if people are aiming for that, not an outcome, I think that would be great. If they actually want to have that experience, all the bulk of that diversity in emotion and experience, that's what makes running a business fun. And if you are aiming for the door and you just want the end, I think it makes it much harder. If you can fall in love with the day to day, the grit, the grind, all the successes, all the difficulty, I feel like if entrepreneurs take that stance, it may be easier.
I mean, I love that. I mean, I just got little chills when you were talking about it because I feel the same way. And the richness of the journey is is really what we're able to step back and look back and say, "Wow, that was really awesome." I think I've told you this before. One piece of advice I got from somebody early on, uh, we're about to do this big deal at this company, and they said, "Listen, Eric, it's never one big deal. It's never one big partnership. It's never one big customer. It's all the little things you do every single day that you look back over a long period of time and be like, holy shit, look what we created. Look what the platform we've created. Look at the people we've ultimately helped." And so for your very last question, I want you to give advice to that non-business professional who, whether that is a therapist, whether that is a plumber, whether that is a any type of small business professional who's got a real skill. They have a technical skill or a skill to provide, and they're providing that skill, and they're thinking about, I want to go on my own. I want to build my own business. I don't need to build a software company. I just want to do something on my own. And I don't have necessarily the background, the business skills to do it. What advice would you give to that person where you were, what now, almost 20 years ago?
Sometimes I wonder if this is dangerous, but I'm a huge proponent of self-employment. And what I ask people to, I mean, people ask me this question. I mean, sometimes they come in and they want to have this conversation is like, do I have the aptitude for this? Am I built for this? I think actually asking yourself those psychological questions about your overall personality and your risk tolerance, and it is important. But I don't think anything's more important than actually taking the lead. There is so much focus on failure. I mean, it's the first thing people talk about. I want to try, but I'm afraid to fail. And that you might. In fact, you and I both know a lot of tech companies. I mean, when people say, "Oh, that's great, you sold your tech company," I'm like, "Nah, I could have very well as not." I mean, I'm like, "Well, yeah, I thank you for the credit, but the statistical likelihood that I would not is just is 10 times as high." I really think that our life is precious. There is no greater commodity than our time, and I want as many people as possible to color what I say is like color right off the page, right? There is absolutely no issue in the worst thing that can happen is not failure. The worst thing that can happen is you will not color on your page. And I want you to color on the page and actually color right off of it. I want you to take the leap, ask the questions, be vulnerable, bump around like inside this pinball machine we call operating a business and, have the experience because I think that the outcome is so rich. I've been kind of playing with this mantra myself because it just helps me. And, I was driving the other day and I just reminded myself of it, and it immediately kind of brings me back to a more centered place, which is I tell myself all the time, it's very simple. I just say, "One day you're gonna miss this." Like, one
Oh,
day I
that's
might
very cool.
miss this.
Yeah.
Like, just even this hour, we can't get it back, and it's really meaningful, and so when people ask me, and also in their own profession, people ask, like, "How can I innovate or start something in business when I'm just in this profession?" These are the best people set up to actually innovate. They might have to get the business questions answered, and they might not have all the surround sound and they might not have the corner pieces to the puzzle, but they certainly have, um this industry knowledge that is key to innovating. And if you look at every single industry, you see these innovators coming from their own specific industries. They're able to grow their specific knowledge. I think it was Naval Ravikant that says specific knowledge at scale is where your power is.
Mhm.
And and this is where you actually earn the most and do the best in life is where you figure out not how to get the job everybody else has and not how to do exactly what other people are doing. It's where you look at your own specific combination of kind of history and experience and then try to scale that.
I mean, you mentioned so much in there. I've learned a ton in the process, but you mentioned something about the importance of our greatest asset, which is time. And I want to thank you, Jessica, for your time today. Your time as a friend, your time as my first guest on my podcast, and really just your time in general that you're willing to share your thoughts, your learnings, your lessons with everyone who has a chance to listen to this. So I want to thank you because you are truly an inspiring entrepreneur. You are a true business underdog who has reached the other side, even though I know you still feel like a business underdog, that you always feel that way.
Yeah.
But your success is inspirational, hopefully to others as much as it is to me. And so I just want to thank you again, Jessica, for joining us today. Wow, what an incredible journey Jessica shared with us today. I'm genuinely inspired by her story, not just because of her success, but because of the sheer determination and resilience she demonstrated really at every step. Listening to Jessica, I'm struck by how she didn't let the lack of traditional business or tech background stop her from innovating in an industry that desperately needed change. She saw a problem, an inefficient and uncomfortable billing process that affected both practitioners and patients, and instead of accepting it as status quo, she took action. What really stands out is Jessica's mindset. She embraced vulnerability and was unafraid to admit what she didn't know. She asked questions, sought help, and taught herself along the way. This willingness to step into the unknown, to learn on the fly, is a powerful reminder that you don't need to have all the answers before you start. You just need the curiosity, the courage, and the determination to keep moving forward. Jessica also highlighted the importance of resilience and grit. She faced countless obstacles, financial challenges, industry skepticism, the daunting task of juggling multiple roles. But she didn't let these barriers deter her. Instead, she viewed failure not as something to fear, but as an expected part of the journey and an opportunity to learn to grow. Her story underscores the idea of breaking barriers often requires us to step outside of our comfort zones, to color right off the page, as she beautifully put it. It's about embracing the full experience, the struggles, the setbacks, and the successes, and recognize that the journey itself is where the real value lies. For all of us, we have that all the time. That's where the juice is. So for all of us listening, I have a few key takeaways from Jessica's journey. First, don't let the fear of failure hold you back. The real failure is not trying at all. We hear this all the time, but it's so true. If you see a problem or an opportunity, take the leap of faith. You might stumble along the way, but each stumble is just one more step forward. Second, build genuine relationships and don't be afraid to ask for help. I can't tell you how much this has helped me in my own career. People are often more willing to support you than you may think, and a collaboration could open doors you never even knew existed. Third, leverage your unique background and experiences. As Jessica showed, sometimes the best innovation comes from those within the industry who deeply understand the challenges and needs. Jessica used her psychology background to help her navigate really uncharted waters within the vertical SaaS space. And lastly, maintain a mindset of continuing learning and curiosity. The business landscape is always changing, and staying open to new knowledge and new experiences is the key to adapting and thriving. Jessica's journey is a powerful reminder that breaking barriers isn't about having all the resources or knowledge up front. It's about having the determination to start and the resilience to keep going and the openness to learn along the way. I hope her story has inspired you as much as it inspires me. And so until next time, stay inspired, keep pushing forward, and embrace your inner underdog. Thanks again. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I'd like to invite you to subscribe to Business Underdog on your favorite podcast platform. By subscribing, you'll never miss an episode and you'll be the first to hear these incredible stories. Please be sure to follow us on social and visit our website at businessunderdog.com for episode updates, resources, and more. And thank you for listening today. Until next time, stay inspired, keep pushing forward, and embrace your inner underdog.